pages a day to finish within the amount of days that we calculated we'd have time to read. But we've been at a pace of about 100 pages a day. So that's not nothing. And at the same time, the energy, near the end of the race, sometimes it goes down a little bit. So just get enough rest. Make sure you're ready for the main thing, which is just to come here and hear Bhagavatam. And we'll be reading all the way until the 15th day, and then the 16th, some devotees are leaving. And how does that sound to everybody? We have 2 weeks starting from today, or 15 days, 16 days total, with including today. Some of the days are they'll be a little different. Like tomorrow, we'll have a slightly different schedule because we have a Govardhan Puja class from 8 to 9:30. Then we have Go Puja, and then we have Kirtan on Govardhan Hill. We're at the lotus feet of Giriraj, where we do Abhishek. And then we read in the afternoon normally. And Prabhupada's disappearance day is another day that we have about a half a day in the afternoon. Other than that, most days are fairly normal. Does anybody have any comments or questions about from the halftime speech?
Thanks, Coach.
Okay, team. We're committed to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam together. Everyone put your hand in, and it's Krishna on 3 and up. 1, 2, 3. Krishna. Okay, go get him. Okay, where's Karuna Sagar? How are we going to know where we're starting if he's not here? Where is he? Karuna Sagar, you have an eternal service now. Where are we? 43? Yes? Okay. The Pitas themselves took possession of the invisible body, the source of their existence. It is through the medium of this invisible body that those well versed in the rituals offer oblations to the sadhyas and Pitas in the form of their departed ancestors on the occasion of Shraddha. Purport: Shraddha is a ritualistic performance observed by the followers of the Vedas. There is a yearly occasion of 15 days when ritualistic religionists follow the principle of offering oblations to departed souls. Thus, those fathers and ancestors who, by freaks of nature, might not have a gross body for material enjoyment can again gain such bodies due to the offering of Shraddha oblations by their descendants. The performance of Shraddha, or offering oblations with prasad, is still current in India, especially in Gaya, where oblations are offered at the lotus feet of Vishnu in a celebrated temple. Because the Lord is thus pleased with the devotional service of the descendants, by His grace He liberates the condemned souls or forefathers who do not have gross bodies, and He favors them to again receive a gross body for development of spiritual advancement. Unfortunately, by the influence of Maya, the conditioned soul employs the body he gets for sense gratification, forgetting that such an occupation may lead him to return to an invisible body. The devotee of the Lord, or one who is in Krishna consciousness, however, does not need to perform such ritualistic ceremonies as Shraddha, because he is always pleasing the Supreme Lord. Therefore, his fathers and ancestors who might have been in difficulty are automatically relieved. The vivid example is Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj requested Lord Nrsingadev to deliver his sinful father, who had so many times offended the lotus feet of the Lord. The Lord replied that in a family where a Vaishnava like Prahlad is born, not only his father, but his father's father and their fathers up to the 14th father back are all automatically delivered. The conclusion, therefore, is that Krishna consciousness is the sum total of all good work for the family, for society, and for all living entities. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author says that a person fully conversant with Krishna consciousness does not perform any rituals because he knows that simply by serving Krishna in full Krishna consciousness, all rituals are automatically performed. Does anybody feel a verse coming on? How about Vedeshu Yagneshu Tavasu Chaiva Dhaneshu Yat Punyavalam Pratishtam Adyeti Tatsarvamidam Vaditva Yogi Paramstanam Upaiti Charya. Krishna says the film somebody performs devotional service not bereft of any of the other stuff. Text 44. Then Lord Brahma, by his ability to be hidden from vision, created the siddhas and vidyadharas and gave them that wonderful form of his known as antardana. Antardana means that these living creatures can be perceived to be present, but they cannot be seen by vision. One day, Brahma, the creator of the living entities, beheld his own reflection in the water, and admiring himself, he evolved Kimpurushas as well as Kinnaras out of that reflection. The Kimpurushas and Kinnaras took possession of that shadowy form left by Brahma. That is why they and their spouses sing his praises by recounting his exploits at every daybreak. The time early in the morning, 1.5 hours before sunrise, is called brāhma-muhūrta. During this brāhma-muhūrta, spiritual activities are recommended. Spiritual activities performed early in the morning have a greater effect than in any other part of the day. Once Brahma lay down with his body stretched at full length, he was very concerned that the work of creation had not proceeded apace, and in a sullen mood he gave up that body too. Oh dear Vidura, the hair that dropped from that body transformed into snakes, and even while the body crawled, along with its hands and feet contracted, there sprang from it ferocious serpents and nagas with their hoods expanded. Imagine what it's like to be Brahma. Everything you do is like, all I did was look in the mirror, you know. One day, Brahma, the self-born, the first living creature, felt as if the object of his life had been accomplished. At that time, he evolved from his mind the Manus, who promote the welfare activities of the universe. The self-possessed creator gave them his own human form. On seeing the Manus, those who had been created earlier, the demigods, the Gandharvas and so on, applauded Brahma, the Lord of the universe. They prayed, O Creator of the universe, we are glad. What you have produced is well done, since ritualistic acts have now been established soundly in this human form. We shall all share the sacrificial oblations. Purport, the importance of sacrifice is also mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, verse 10. The Lord confirms there that in the beginning of creation, Brahma created the Manus, along with the ritualistic sacrificial method, and blessed them. Continue these sacrificial rites, and you will be gradually elevated to your proper position of self-realization, and will also enjoy material happiness. All the living entities created by Brahma are conditioned souls and are inclined to lord it over material nature. The purpose of sacrificial rituals is to revive gradually the spiritual realization of the living entities. That is the beginning of life within this universe. These sacrificial rituals, however, are intended to please the Supreme Lord. Unless one pleases the Supreme Lord, or unless one is Krishna conscious, one cannot be happy either in material enjoyment or in spiritual realization. Text 52. Having equipped himself with austere penance, adoration, mental concentration, and absorption in devotion, accompanied by dispassion, and having controlled his senses, Brahma, the self-born living creature, evolved great sages and his beloved sons. Purport: the ritualistic performances of sacrifice are meant for material economic development. In other words, they are meant to keep the body in good condition for cultivation of spiritual knowledge. But for actual attainment of spiritual knowledge, other qualifications are needed. What is essential is vidya, or worship of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes the word yoga is used to refer to the gymnastic performances of different bodily postures which help mental concentration. Generally, the different bodily postures in the yoga system are accepted by less intelligent men to be the end of yoga, but actually they are meant to concentrate the mind upon the Supremes, upon the Supersoul. After creating persons for economic development, Brahma created sages who would set the example for spiritual realization. 53. To each one of these sons, the unborn creator of the universe gave a part of his own body, which was characterized by deep meditation, mental concentration, supernatural power, austerity, adoration, and renunciation. The word vira viraktimat in this verse means possessed of the qualification of renunciation. Spiritual realization cannot be attained by materialistic persons. For those who are addicted to sense enjoyment, spiritual realization is not possible. In Bhagavad Gita it is stated that those who are too attached to seeking material possessions and material enjoyment cannot reach yoga samadhi, absorption in Krishna consciousness. Propaganda that one can enjoy this life materially and at the same time spiritually advance is simply bogus. The principles of renunciation are four. 1, to avoid illicit sex life. 2, to avoid meat eating. 3, to avoid intoxication. And 4, to avoid gambling. These 4 principles are called tapasya, or austerity. To absorb the mind in the Supreme, in Krishna consciousness, is the process of spiritual realization. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 3rd canto, 20th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Conversation Between Maitreya and Vidura. Jai, Jai. Victory. Now we'll take some reflections and questions. We'll start with Devavrata. Nothing? Go ahead. The Kim Purushas. These names are interesting. It means, are you really a human, or what are you anyway? It's hard to tell. Yes, online. Is it from a Pargarangi? Yay.
Hare Krishna, please accept my respectful obeisances. In text 46, it's mentioned that spiritual activities performed in the morning have a greater effect. Could you please elaborate?
Srimad Gurur Ashtakam Metaruchya brāhma-muhūrta patita prayatnad yastena vrindavana nata sakshat sevaiva labhya jana shanta eva. When you chant the Guru Ashtakam during Brāhma-muhūrta, you go back to Godhead. Well, there's a science of muhurtas. I have a friend who specializes in that. People consult him from around the world. Which muhurta? There are various muhurtas throughout the day. These divisions of time that we heard about earlier. And each one of them has a special facility. It's just that brāhma-muhūrta is a time when free nectar is floating in the air. And if you come late, you're like the person who came for the half-off sale the day after it was over. Duh. So, timing is very important, or it's extremely helpful. Because there's a time when there's more spiritual, supportive spiritual energy available. Brāhma-muhūrta is that time. Divyanga Prabhu.
Srila Prabhupada said that if you read 1 hour during the brāhma-muhūrta, it's like reading 5 hours the rest of the day.
That's a pretty good return on your investment. Okay. There's free nectar floating through the air. We'll take Prabhupada Priya, then we'll go to Sudhira Madhava.
Hare Krishna. I was just observing here in these verses that Brahma's moods, according to the mood that Brahma's in, certain types of beings are created. Like we see that when he's frustrated and kind of maybe impatient because creation is going on a little too slowly, then that gives rise to the snakes and nagas. When he's feeling accomplished and satisfied, then the manus are born, who are very much applauded and appreciated. When he's feeling a little vain, looking at himself in the mirror and the reflection and admiring himself, then we come out with the Kimpurushas and Kinnaras. And then when he's absorbed in devotion, then we get the great sages. So I was thinking that also this is, to a very minute extent, it's true also for us that, according to the mood that we're in, the mental state or the, emotional state that we're in, that has ripple effects that go out into the world and create a kind of atmosphere or environment that we live in, and that affects everybody who enters into that environment.
Well put. Well put. Sudhira?
Technical observation. In this, in verse 43, it mentioned 14 generations. But in the 10th chapter of 7th canto, it says 21 generations. It's just for explaining, or there's a difference between two?
No explanation. It's just, there's a lot of benefit for the family. Yes.
Continuing on that, I just feel that Vidura did not divert his attention from Krishna's devotion. And I think he believed in the promise that Krishna and Prahlad Maharaj stories, that he had firm belief in that Shraddha was not really a ritual that is required for him to practice, perhaps.
Uh-huh. Bhaktis tvayi stirataya bhagavan yadisad. Anyone else? I see a lot of smiles out there. Yes. Go right ahead, Vamshuli, and then we'll come back to Avaduta.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. I was admiring and also curious about how Brahma continued his service despite these disappointments or things that did not go so well, with what we have heard yesterday and even today, and how to maintain that inspiration despite the difficulties, or how things sometimes don't work out, or the results are not exactly what we hope to see.
He's such a good example, Brahma, for us. He has a very positive mindset, and he gets a lot of encouragement directly from Krishna. So you can see some of the times he made mistakes, and then he had to start over. So sometimes, or I should say, we could also take that example to know that if you make a mistake, as Prabhupada writes, in the light of the Bhagavad, it's not necessarily detrimental. It can become the pillar to success. Brahma, we've already heard a couple times, if not three, that he gave up the mentality that created the mistake in the first place, rectified himself. And he's a very qualified person. Practiced over at least 100 lifetimes of being very careful with how he controlled his senses. Gets a position there. And it can be encouraging to know that even somebody so qualified has obstacles, but he just keeps doing his duty. Okay, we have Avaduta. Okay, and we have Halayuta Kripa.
I just liked how Prabhupada translated this word in text 52 in the purport. Prabhupada writes that vidya, or worship of the Supreme Lord. So I was thinking generally, we all know that in Sanskrit, words have many different meanings. It's nice to see vidya, which we commonly know as knowledge, to be seen as worship of the Supreme Lord. So it seems like those who are in knowledge, then they engage in worshiping Krishna.
Nice observation. Okay, Halayuta, your turn, and then we have another one from Pargarogi.
Hare Krishna. So we read the purport about how devotees don't necessarily need to do the Shraddha ceremony because they're already pleasing the Supreme Lord. I had a question regarding this on a practical level that especially those of us who come from Hindu backgrounds, there's a lot of ceremony. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
There's a lot of ceremonies that we have to do, and although we're devotees now, when we say we don't have to do it, the family might object. So how do we proceed carefully?
We like ceremonies. They're an opportunity to distribute books. Even funerals, everyone should get a Gita. And any of these Shraddha ceremonies, you should double down on them and say, Mom, Dad, I'm coming. Of course, your parents are pure devotees, but just say, any Hindu family, you got to great in funeral, bar mitzvah, Hindu bar mitzvah. Whatever it is, as far as we're concerned, it's an excuse to preach Krishna consciousness. So when we found Bhadra Purnima and started promoting, and somebody said, oh, well, it's like this thing, so we don't care. It's an excuse to distribute Krishna consciousness. So use those rituals. Just tell them, I'm coming, but I'm bringing a truck with me. And everybody's getting a book or a set of books. Those are the best times. I've seen it. Remember the first funeral we ever did? It was Dilip Bhai Prabhu's father passed away. And he's such an exalted soul. Hundreds of people came to that wedding, and he made sure everybody got a Gita. Dilip Bhai did. It was fantastic. Remember? Yeah. I mean, it's so auspicious. Normally, and yeah, these events, especially funerals, can really be draining. But when you bring in Harinam, which we did recently at another funeral, it was a mixed crowd. So many different people came there from. It was a really mixed crowd. There was workers who had no idea, colleagues, students, family members, some of them devotees, some not. And everyone's conflicted about how they should act at a funeral. Nobody knows exactly what he's supposed to do. How am I supposed to react? Should I smile? Should I be like this, that? And then when we got the green light, because we had some inside connections there for the kirtan inside the funeral home, and we started, everything was clarified. So all these rituals, Jiva Goswami said, unless you have the holy name there, they don't mean anything anyway. the only thing that works in Kali Yuga. You can throw rice around, you can sprinkle water on everybody, you can tell them don't eat for a month. Nothing works, only the holy name. So good to bring the holy name and huge stacks of books. That's a good time when everyone, especially funeral, they have this shmashan vairagya, the renunciation of the crematorium. For about 3-day window you have before they go back to normal. Okay, we have online, yeah. Apar Gurungi. No?
This is from Alexander and Valentina.
Oh, they're right outside. Okay, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, dear Guru Maharaj, and all the devotees, please accept our obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We have a reflection from verse 52. But for actual attainment of spiritual knowledge, other qualifications are needed. What is essential is vidya, or worship of the Supreme Lord. Could you kindly elaborate what is knowledge or vidya?
Devotional service. Right, Avaduta? 24/7, he says. Worship of the Supreme. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this 3.20 and 51, in the last paragraph, Prabhupada mentioned that unless one pleases Supreme Lord or unless one is Krishna consciousness, one cannot be happy either in material enjoyment or in spiritual realization. I couldn't understand the second part, the spiritual realization. Isn't
spiritual what?
Realization.
Well, there's different levels of spiritual realization. So this is something that Shukadeva Goswami points out. That Narada points out to Vyasa. Vyasa is presenting spiritual realization, and then he says, I can't get any bhav. And then Narada comes and he tells, Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhava varjinam nashobhate jnanam alam niranjanam kutak puna shashvata bhadramishvare nacharpitam karma yadapyakaranam. He said, no wonder you're not getting any bhav, because even Naishkarmyam, even if you have this idea, I'm not touching anything in the material world. I'm only working for some kind of service. Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhava varjitam nashobhate. But if you don't have a chuta bhava, then he said, nashobhate, it's not beautiful. It doesn't reach the threshold of attracting the soul in ananda. You have to have mada and mohan for that. And therefore he says, then what to speak of all the other stupid stuff people do, which is misery even before you start it. So self-realization in all its iterations, unless it has this concept of mada and mohan, relationship with the Lord, that's so overwhelmingly beautiful and so attractive that you just are not interested anymore in the material world, then it's not enough. It won't do it for the soul. Like Divyanga said this morning, he'd already seen and done all that stuff. Wasn't attractive anymore.
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. You mentioned about the story of Valmiki. He had to
I mentioned what?
The story of Valmiki.
Valmiki.
Yeah, he chanted 30,000 years, Ram, 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 holy names. So, does it take so much time?
Definitely. We should think like that. We shouldn't think, I'll do this for 30 minutes. We should think more like, I'll do this for 30,000 years. Try to overshoot the finish line. Yeah, think about picking out the ocean with a piece of kusha grass. Think about the little bird who went to the ocean. Ocean stole her eggs and she said, that's it. I'm not having this. I'm going to drain every drop. And it started pecking out the ocean with her tiny little beak. And then Garuda came after it spread all over the countryside that there was this little bird trying to drain the ocean. And it was on CNN. And Garuda heard it and said, I'm going there. And Garuda came there and said, okay, I'll dry up the ocean with my wings. And the ocean said, okay, take the eggs. So we have to have that. We should think 30,000 is not a long time to invest in chanting the holy name. If we think like that, we can maybe be just about balanced, be ready for 30,000 years or even 30,000 lifetimes. It's that valuable. It's not a cheap thing that a person who's only half serious can get within a few years or even 40 years. You have to be dedicated. David Vrata. That's why Prabhupada said sit properly. That's what that sutra means. Sit there for 30,000 years, and if ants build a hill over you, just sit there and keep chanting.
I was thinking of this example of Mukunda when he gets rejected by Mahaprabhu. And the servants kept going back and said, well, will you ever give him his mercy? And he said, after 10,000 births. And then Mukunda became elated.
And that's when Mahaprabhu called him back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Narad Muni, and then Samya Prash.
I was just these past 2 days you started our readings with Udila Aruna in that last verse. Nama bina kichu nahi goaro chauda bhuvana maje. And just this aspect that the holy name is the only thing that's existing. It's the only thing that has sustenance. I remember I was traveling with Parameshwar Prabhu, and I remember one time he told me, sometimes he'll just be driving and he just will tell you something just out of the blue. And one of the things he told me that really startled me, and he was like, everything else here is going to die. The only thing that you have is the holy name. And I was just reflecting on that through this conversation, that I lack that urgency to actually understand that nothing else is going to be there for me. So then if we have that understanding, then we're willing to sit for 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, as much as we possibly can, because that's the only thing that's there for us.
What a beautiful realization. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Ready? Yuvras. And Halayuta, did we get to you? We did. Okay. Last one then.
I was just appreciating that our Brahma is a devotee, because that's not always the case. There is a range of consciousness. You do get the post of Brahma with expertise, but our Brahma is a Brahma who's sold out to Krishna, and that's
makes a
seeing
huge
how much
difference.
Everything's following from him. It's
like
good to be in that universe.
In ISKCON, if you're in a place where the GBC is not into book, you feel it. Have a little Kitri and move on. Okay. Next is chapter 21, conversation between Manu and Kardama. Vidura said, the line of Swayambhuva Manu was most esteemed and wonderful sage. I beg you, give me an account of this race whose progeny multiplied through sexual intercourse. Purport. Regulated sex life to generate good population is worth accepting. Actually, Vidura was not interested in hearing the history of persons who merely engaged in sex life, but he was interested in the progeny of Swayambhuva Manu, because in that dynasty, good devotee kings appeared who protected their subjects very carefully with spiritual knowledge. By hearing the history of their activities, therefore, one becomes more enlightened. An important word used in this connection is parama samataha, which indicates that the progeny created by Swayambhuva Manu and his sons was approved of by great authorities. In other words, sex life for creating exemplary population is acceptable to all sages and authorities of Vedic scripture. 2. The two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, Priyavrata and Uttanapada, ruled the world consisting of 7 islands just according to religious principles. Srimad Bhagavatam is also a history of the great rulers of different parts of the universe. In this verse, the names of Priyavrata and Uttanapada, sons of Swayambhuva, are mentioned. They ruled this earth, which is divided into 7 islands. These 7 islands are still current as Asia, Europe, Africa, America, Australia, and the North and South Poles. There's no chronological history of all of the Indian kings in Srimad Bhagavatam. But the deeds of the most important kings, such as Priyavrata and Uttanapada, and many others like Lord Ramachandra and Maharaj Yudhishthira, are recorded because the activities of such pious kings are worth hearing. People may benefit by studying their histories. O holy Brahmana, O sinless one, you have spoken of his daughter, known by the name Devahuti, as the wife of the sage Kardama, the Lord of created beings. Purport. Here we are speaking of Swayambhuva Manu, but in Bhagavad Gita we hear about Vaiśeṣika Manu. The present age belongs to the Vaiśeṣika Manu. Swayambhuva Manu was previously ruling, and his history begins from the Varaha age, or the millennium when the Lord appeared as the boar. There are 14 Manus in one day of the life of Brahma, and in the life of each Manu there are particular incidents. The Vaiśeṣika Manu of Bhagavad Gita is different from Swayambhuva Manu. How many offspring did that great yogi beget through the princess who was endowed with 8-fold perfection in the yoga principles? Oh, pray tell me this, for I am eager to hear it. Purport. Here Vidura inquired about Kardama Muni and his wife Devahuti, and about their children. It is described here that Devahuti was very much advanced in the performance of 8-fold yoga. The 8 divisions of yoga performance are described as 1. Control of the senses. 2. Strict following of the rules and regulations. 3. Practice of the different sitting postures. 4. Control of the breath. 5. Withdrawing the senses from sense objects. 6. Concentration of the mind. 7. Meditation. And 8. Self-realization. After self-realization, there are 8 further perfectional stages, which are called yoga siddhis. The husband and wife, Kardama and Devahuti, were advanced in yoga practice. The husband was a Mahayogi, great mystic, and the wife was a Yoga Lakshana, or one advanced in yoga. They united and produced children. Formerly, after making their lives perfect, great sages and saintly persons used to beget children. Otherwise, they strictly observed the rules and regulations of celibacy. Brahmacharya, following the rules and regulations of celibacy, is required for perfection of self-realization and mystic power. There is no recommendation in the Vedic scriptures that one can go on enjoying material sense gratification at one's whims, as one likes, and at the same time become a great meditator by paying a rascal some money. 5. O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other 2 daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. All the great personalities who increased the population in the beginning of the creation are called Prajapatis. Brahma is also known as Prajapati, as were some of his later sons. Swayambhuva Manu is also known as Prajapati, as is Daksha, another son of Brahma. Swayambhuva had 2 daughters, Akuti and Prasuti. Prajapati Ruchi married Akuti and Daksha married Prasuti. These couples and their children produced immense numbers of children to populate the entire universe. Vidura's inquiry was, how did they beget the population in the beginning? The great sage Maitreya replied, commanded by Lord Brahma to beget children in the worlds. The worshipful Kardama Muni practiced penance on the bank of the river Saraswati for a period of 10,000 years. It is understood herein that Kardama Muni meditated in yoga for 10,000 years before attaining perfection. Similarly, we have information that Valmiki Muni also practiced yoga meditation for 60,000 years, better double that, before attaining perfection. Therefore, yoga practice can be successfully performed by persons who have a very long duration of life, such as 100,000 years. In that way, it is possible to have perfection in yoga. Otherwise, there is no possibility of attaining the real perfection. Following the regulators, controlling the senses, and practicing the different sitting postures are merely the preliminary practices. We do not know how people can be captivated by the bogus yoga system in which it is stated that simply by meditating 15 minutes daily, one can attain the perfection of becoming one with God. This age, Kali Yuga, is the age of bluffing and quarrel. Actually, there is no possibility of attaining yoga perfection by such paltry proposals. The Vedic literature for emphasis clearly states 3 times that in this age of Kali, Kalau nastyeva nastyeva nastyeva, there is no other alternative than Harinama, chanting the holy name of the Lord. During that period of penance, the sage Kardama, by worship through devotional service and trance, propitiated the personality of Godhead, who is the quick bestower of all blessings upon those who flee to him for protection. The significance of meditation is described here. Kardama Muni practiced mystic yoga meditation for 10,000 years just to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari. Therefore, whether one practices yoga or speculates and does research to find God, one's efforts must be mixed with the process of devotion. Without devotion, nothing can be perfect. The target of perfection and realization is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said that one who constantly engages in Krishna consciousness is the topmost yogi. The Personality of Godhead Hari also fulfills the desires of his surrendered devotee. One has to surrender unto the lotus feet of the Personality of Godhead, Hari or Krishna, in order to achieve real success. Devotional service or engagement in Krishna consciousness is the direct method, and all other methods, although recommended, are indirect. In this age of Kali, the direct method is especially more feasible than the indirect because people are short-living. Their intelligence is poor, and they are poverty-stricken and embarrassed by so many miserable disturbances. Lord Chaitanya therefore has given the greatest boon. In this age, one simply has to chant the holy name of God and attain perfection in spiritual life. The words Samprapede Harim mean that in various ways, Kardama Muni satisfied the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari by his devotional service. Devotional service is also expressed by the word Kriya Yogena. Kardama Muni not only meditated, but also engaged in devotional service. To attain perfection in yoga practice or meditation, one must act in devotional service by hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. Remembering is meditation also. But who is to be remembered? One should remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Not only must one remember the Supreme Person, one must hear about the activities of the Lord and chant his glories. This information is in the authoritative scriptures. After engaging himself for 10,000 years in performing different types of devotional service, Kardama Muni attained the perfection of meditation. But that is not possible in this age of Kali, wherein it is very difficult to live for as much as 100 years. At the present moment, who will be successful in the rigid performance of the many yoga rules and regulations? Moreover, perfection is attained only by those who are surrendered souls. Where there is no mention of the Personality of Godhead, where is their surrender? And And where there is no meditation upon the personality of Godhead, where is the yoga practice? Unfortunately, people in this age, especially persons who are of demoniac nature, want to be cheated. Thus, the personality of Godhead sends great cheaters who mislead them in the name of yoga and render their lives useless and doomed. In Bhagavad Gita, therefore, it is clearly stated in the 16th chapter, verse 17, that rascals of self-made authority, being puffed up by illegally collected money, perform yoga without following the authoritative books. They are very proud of the money they have plundered from the innocent persons who wanted to be cheated. Then in the Satya Yuga, the lotus-eyed Supreme Personality of Godhead, being pleased, showed himself to that Kardama Muni and displayed his transcendental form, which can be understood only through the Vedas. Here 2 points are very significant. The first is that Kardama Muni attained success by yoga practice in the beginning of Satya Yuga, when people used to live for 100,000 years. Kardama Muni attained success, and the Lord, being pleased with him, showed him his form, which is not imaginary. Sometimes the impersonalists recommend that one can arbitrarily concentrate one's mind on some form he imagines or which pleases him. But here it is very clearly said that the form which the Lord showed to Kardama Muni by his divine grace is described in the Vedic literature. Shabdam Brahma. The forms of the Lord are clearly indicated in the Vedic literature. Kardama Muni did not discover any imaginary form of God as alleged by rascals. He actually saw the eternal, blissful, and transcendental form of the Lord. Kardama Muni saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is free from material contamination. In his eternal form, effulgent like the sun, wearing a garland of white lotuses and water lilies. The Lord was clad in spotless yellow silk, and his lotus face was fringed with slick, dark locks of curly hair. Adorned with a crown and earrings, he held his characteristic conch, disc, and mace in 3 of his hands, and a white lily in the 4th. He glanced about in a happy, smiling mood, whose sight captivates the hearts of all devotees. And that brings us to the Gauranga stretch. A golden streak on his chest, the famous Kaustuba gem suspended from his neck. He stood in the air with his lotus feet placed on the shoulders of Garuda. Purport: the descriptions in verses 9 through 11 of the Lord in his transcendental eternal forms are understood to be descriptions from the authoritative Vedic version. These descriptions are certainly not the imagination of Kardama Muni. The decorations of the Lord are beyond material conception, as admitted even by impersonalists like Shankaracharya. Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has nothing to do with the material creation. The varieties of the transcendental Lord, his body, his form, his dress, his instruction, his words, are not manufactured by the material energy, but are all confirmed in the Vedic literature. By performance of yoga, Kardama Muni actually saw the Supreme Lord as he is. There was no point in seeing an imagined form of God after practicing yoga for 10,000 years. The perfection of yoga, therefore, does not terminate in voidness or impersonalism. On the contrary, the perfection of yoga is attained when one actually sees the personality of Godhead in his eternal form. The process of Krishna consciousness is to deliver Vedic literature, is to deliver the form of the Lord, is to deliver the form of Krishna directly. The form of Krishna is described in the authoritative Vedic literature, Brāhma-muhūrta. His abode is made of? Correct. And the Lord plays there as a? And is served by many thousands of? These descriptions are authoritative, and a Krishna conscious person takes them directly, acts on them, preaches them, and practices devotional service as enjoined in the authoritative scriptures. 12. When Kardama Muni actually realized the Supreme Personality of Godhead in person, he was greatly satisfied because his transcendental desire was fulfilled. He fell on the ground with his head bowed to offer obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. His heart naturally full of love of God, with folded hands, he satisfied the Lord with prayers. Purport: the realization of the personal form of the Lord is the highest perfectional stage of yoga. In the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where yoga practice is described, this realization of the personal form of the Lord is called the perfection of yoga. After practicing the sitting postures and other regulative principles of the system, one finally reaches the stage of samadhi, absorption in the Supreme. In the samadhi stage, one can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his partial form as Paramatma, or as he is. Samadhi is described in authoritative yoga scriptures such as the Patanjali Sutras to be a transcendental pleasure. The yoga system describes in the books of Patanjali is authoritative, and the modern so-called yogis who have manufactured their own ways, not consulting the authorities, are simply ludicrous. The Patanjali yoga system is called Ashtanga Yoga. Sometimes impersonalists pollute the Patanjali yoga system because they are monists. Patanjali describes that the soul is transcendentally pleased when he meets the supersoul and sees him. If the existence of the supersoul and the individual soul is admitted, then the impersonalist theory of monism is nullified. Therefore, some impersonalists and void philosophers twist the Patanjali system in their own way to pollute the whole yoga process. According to Patanjali, when one becomes free from all material desires, he attains his real transcendental situation. And realization of that stage is called spiritual power. May I read it again? Yes, Vaiśeṣika. According to Patanjali, when one becomes free from all material desires, he attains his real transcendental situation, and realization of that stage is called spiritual power. In material activities, a person engaged in the modes of material nature. In material activities, a person engages in the modes of material nature. The aspirations of such people are 1, to be religious, 2, to be economically enriched, 3, to be able to gratify the senses, and at last, 4, to become one with the Supreme. According to the monist, when a yogi becomes one with the Supreme and loses his individual existence, he attains the highest stage, called Kaivalya. But actually, the stage of realization of the personality of Godhead is Kaivalya. The oneness of understanding that the Supreme Lord is fully spiritual, and that in full spiritual realization one can understand what he is, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called Kaivalya. Or in the language of Patanjali, realization of spiritual power. His proposal is that when one is freed from material desires and fixed in spiritual realization of the self and the super self, that is called Chit Shakti. In full spiritual realization, there is a perception of spiritual happiness. And that happiness is described in Bhagavad Gita as the supreme happiness, which is beyond the material senses. Trance is described to be of 2 kinds, Sampragnata and asampragnata. Sampragnata, or mental speculation and self-realization. In samadhi or asampragnata, one can realize by his spiritual senses the spiritual form of the Lord. That is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. According to Patanjali, when one is fixed in constant realization of the supreme form of the Lord, one has attained the perfectional stage as attained by Kardama Muni. Unless one attains this stage of perfection beyond the perfection of the preliminaries of the yoga system, there is no ultimate realization. There are 8 perfections in the Ashtanga yoga system. One who has attained them can become lighter than the lightest and greater than the greatest, and he can achieve whatever he likes. But even achieving such material success in yoga is not the perfection or the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is described here. Kardama Muni saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his eternal form. Devotional service begins with the relationship of the individual soul and the Supreme Soul, or Krishna and Krishna's devotees. And when one attains it, there's no question of falling down. If through the yoga system one wants to attain the stage of seeing the Supreme Personality of God face to face, but is attracted instead to attainment of some material power, then he is detoured from proceeding further. Material enjoyment, as encouraged by bogus yogis, has nothing to do with the transcendental realization of spiritual happiness. Real devotees of Bhakti Yoga accept only the material necessities of life absolutely needed to maintain the body and soul together. They refrain completely from all exaggerated material sense gratification. Exaggerated material sense gratification. They are prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulation, provided they can make progress in the realization of the personality of Godhead. They are prepared to undergo all kinds of tribulation, provided they can make progress in the realization of the personality of Godhead. Plus, add that to real devotees of Bhakti Yoga accept only the material necessities of life absolutely needed to maintain the body and soul together, semicolon. They refrain completely from all exaggerated material sense gratification. It's good to have categorical understanding of sense gratification. There's necessary sense gratification to survive, and then there's exaggerated sense gratification. What? It's like salt. It's like cutting your fingernails. Not too short, not too long. Any thoughts? Mahendra's smiling. He'll speak.
I heard someone asking, what's exaggerated sensation? I guess that's something what's unnecessary. There is a necessary to maintain the body. As long as you have a body, you have to eat, so that eating and other activities then give some satisfaction. But when it's unnecessary to keep the body and soul together, it's exaggerated. Also, I guess we can take it as imaginary, exaggerated in a sense of expecting something which it doesn't give. It's just in the mind and in the propaganda.
The way that Rupa Goswami puts it, ahara. Ati means extreme. Ahara means eating, but it also means collecting. There's sports and there's extreme sports. There's eating and there's extreme eating. Bana Prabhu?
I had a really powerful, direct realization of why we should be very careful about not reading any of the books besides Srila Prabhupada's books, because there are a lot of different interpretations. I have a friend, I won't mention his name, but he's a rather well-known devotee scholar, and he's published books on yoga, specifically in reference to Patanjali. And I had to give this Bhagavatam class on this verse. So I called him up and asked him if he...
on which verse?
On this verse we just read.
Really?
Yeah.
What are the chances? Go ahead.
And I was actually going to talk to you about this when you were in New Vrindavan. I forgot. And so I thought, you had some valuable insights, because I don't know anything about Patanjali, and Prabhupada's making some specific references. And he got back to me and he said, basically said that Patanjali doesn't talk at all about meditation on the form of the Lord. I was like, okay, Prabhu, thank you, Hare Krishna. It was just, I couldn't believe it. Basically, he was refuting practically everything Prabhupada said. And so there's so many translations of different books out there, and it just, I got the realization we have to be really careful where we're getting our information from.
Oh, thank you for sharing that, Bhana. Mahendra Prabhu?
Yeah, it's just amazing. I looked at if there is any of the acharyas Tika going in detail about Patanjali, and there is nothing. So it's interesting. I find Prabhupada goes into great details and brings a lot of Patanjali's terminology and explains what's asampragnata and sampragyata samadhi and the chik shakti. That comes at the end of the sutras. But to that point of meditation on the Supreme, there is a sutra after the Ishvara Pranidhana, which means surrender to Ishvara. He says Ishvara is a special Vaiśeṣika Purusha who is not touched by the modes, he's the original teacher, etc. And then he said one should meditate on Ishvara by chanting the transcendental sound, by knowing the meaning of the mantra. So there is... And of course the sutras, that's the point, that they're very concise and you don't have the details, but on some sutras, the original commentaries are specifically describe meditation on Vishnu form. So it's all there.
There you have it. Bhana feels better now. Okay. Narada Muni Prabhu. And then Prabhupada Priya.
I have a question regarding this exaggerated material sense gratification.
Yes.
Sometimes in our devotional practice, we come to understand that we're not pure devotees. And I think of this quote, I think Ayanjaprabhu said, he said, sometimes a man just needs a samosa. And I was thinking about, we're going out and we're going on Harinama, we're going on books, and kind of really going out in an intense atmosphere sometimes. How do we know how to balance?
Well, Krishna says, Yukta hara viharasya, yukta chesasya karmasu, yukta swapna vabodasya, yogo bhavati dukkha. Should be sensible and be balanced. So he mentions, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. That's one that we didn't catch on to for a long time. So I remember just brahmacharis sleeping everywhere, especially in class. And a lot of it was due to sleep deprivation. There was an artificial attempt to sleep less and less and less, and thinking that was a badge of spiritual advancement. And then eating. Of course, eating, I can say, no one was trying that hard to eat less, because there was a sense of prasadam, you should eat more. So the balance went the other way, or went out of balance the other way. And then recreation, there's never any sense of recreation. I was in New York a while back. I lived there for 3 years straight. And then Kaustuba Prabhu and I were walking around New York. He said, I'll show you around. And I realized I'd never seen New York for 3 years. I knew my route to the Sankirtan spot. In 1976, I was in Washington, D.C. I just come back from the airport. Prabhupada was there. And somebody came up to me, was just getting out of the van, and they said, Sankirtan van, they said, Prabhupada wants to go down and see the fireworks. It was the bicentennial day in 1976, 200 years celebration of the United States. And I was shocked. Prabhupada wants to see fireworks? You mean we can do that? And then Prabhupada there was an SUV there. It was the first SUV in America. It was called an International Harvester. It's the only company that made one. And Prabhupada got in that with Pushta Krishna and Rupanuga and Pushta Krishna was his personal servant at that time. Maybe Harisari was there. He was there. And so they were there. You could see Prabhupada's profile. Everyone else was lining up in cars behind Prabhupada, trying to cut each other off to get closer to Prabhupada's car. It was jammed in Washington, D.C. And not only did Prabhupada want to see the fireworks, but he also had them drive around Washington, D.C., even though it was crowded at that time. And he looked at all the buildings. He went, what is that one? What is this one? And it was a revelation to me that you could look at the world and see it in relationship to Krishna. And so I'm getting to the fact that that's Krishna says recreation, also recreation. There are ways in which the samosa man needs a samosa. If you're jamming it all the time and you don't take time to recover and gather up your realizations from what you've just done, the intensity of it, then you can become either exhausted or dry or lose your taste. So it's really important to have good rest and eat the right amount of food and not just donuts. You're not obligated to eat donuts every day. You have to be sensible and figure out that you've got a biological machine that runs on certain kinds of fuel, and you got to test it and see how's it doing. There's a way to test it and see how it's working. It's not just do whatever you want and the body will last forever. We've got plenty of evidence to show that doesn't work. And then, recreation means kuyamakati prichiti, make sure you have good friends that you can talk to, go have prasadam with, go for a walk, unstress, take time in nature, those types of things. These are not inordinate sense gratification, they're yukta. They're about being strong and balanced in all the different parts of your life so that you can, as Prabhupada said, fight against Maya. In the 8th canto, Gajendra, Prabhupada goes into this explanation of how everybody has their own needs. And he said we need to be sensually strong. You have to have vitality. That's the spirit of the verse. Kamasya nendriya pritya labhu jiveta yavata. You got to be alive to prosecute Krishna consciousness. If you get way overweight and slothful, it's very difficult to wake up in the morning. You can't do it. If you can't sit on the floor or you can't sit, period. Kimasita vrajetakin. Can that guy sit? Can he sit at all? Or can he even walk? We have to, Prabhupada said, take the requisite amount of sense gratification so that you're strong enough to do your service and not be artificial. We tried it, didn't work. The artificial stuff. Puffies once a day. Little hot milk and puffies once a day, no more eating, that's enough. And also, I remember some godbrothers who were known to be very austere, no names mentioned. They're beloved godbrothers, but never give them the keys to a car, otherwise there's going to be a bloody accident, because they couldn't stay awake long enough. And as soon as they'd sit in class, immediately dive bombing. So you have to find out how you can be yukta and that way perform service. Prabhupada Priya, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna. I liked how this section that we just read started off with Kardama Muni performing penances in devotional service for 10,000 years, all for the purpose of begetting good children. And this is something that we see throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Like the Pachetas did the same exact thing, 10,000 years of penance, meditating on the form of the Lord underwater, all for the sake of having good children. So it always struck me that, in days of yore, these great sages, they took conceiving children something very serious, like it was a very serious matter. This was a service for the Lord, and it had to be done right, because it was going to affect the future of the planet, which was a great concern of theirs. And so they invested that amount of time and energy into preparing their consciousness so that they could produce good children for the benefit of the world. It's something to, think about for young devotees who maybe in the future having children it's not just a casual thing. It's something that Vedic culture took very, very seriously.
Well, I've seen thank you for your comments. It's extremely important. I've seen in some communities where there's householders and then lots of kids. And there is a collective awareness of the importance of the consciousness in which kids are conceived and how they grow up. And for instance, I've seen some communities where it's the practice of pregnant women to read the whole Bhagavatam in 9 months while they're pregnant. And then the devotees are doing Garbhadan Samskar. And then you notice that the kids come out like they're shot from a cannon. They're like, hey, where's the Madanga? Where's my stuff? We're like... And we see it in the modern age, in the Krishna consciousness movement, in those places where the kids are properly conceived and they're given everything necessary, or as much as possible, so that they can keep that vibration going from the time they get out of the womb. They become so qualified by the time they're 10, 12, what to speak of adolescent and in their 20s and 30s. So it is, I've seen the future of the Krishna conscious movement to adopt this idea. I mean, it's really the idea of the varnashram in general to make sure that people are in the highest possible consciousness upon conception, and then to be planning ahead to leave the world as soon as you come into it. And there's that pervasive atmosphere. Nirkula, go ahead.
I was reminded, this phrase, exaggerated material sense gratification, I was reminded of another phrase that Prabhupada used occasionally, of unnecessary necessities.
Unnecessary necessities. Prabhupada had so many turns of phrases. Yeah. Okay. Last point from Vamshuli.
Actually, this is a question, Guru Maharaj. Hearing about how devotees accept tribulations for advancement in Krishna consciousness, I was remembering the example of Kunti Maharani and the Pandavas. They're exalted devotees, and despite such extraordinary trials, they constantly stayed faithful to Krishna, serving him, remembering him, depending on him. In my personal experience, I'm wondering, what is it that inspired them? What is it that is missing for us to stay, or for me to stay inspired and continue seeking progress in Krishna consciousness and not be pushed down by the constant reversals in the material world?
Is that a question?
Yes, Guru Maharaj. How do we overcome, or
how do you overcome what?
The desperation or disappointment when we see reversals. Hare Krishna. When we see reversals or difficulties in spiritual life, and instead of seeking advancement and staying patient despite them, we become a little despondent.
Well, you got to hang around longer, because there's a mathematical principle called the law of large numbers, and the law states that the more times you perform a bona fide experiment. Bona fide means it's a reliable experiment, controlled experiment. The more times you perform it, the more the result comes to the natural, to the result that will be indicated by the practice. That was a little awkward, but I'll just give an example. If you flip a coin twice and it comes up heads, you can walk away and say, it's not true, it's 50-50. But if you flip it 200 times, it's going to start trending that way. And if you flip it 1,000 times, then it creeps up closer to the average mean that it's supposed to be at because of the experiment. So in the same way, the longer we practice Krishna consciousness ourselves and also preach to others, the more we see what goes around comes around. Like a lot of times we preach to people and then they seem flaky and they leave. And then 10 years later they come back and say, I made a mistake, I want to come back. And we may also go through difficulty and then find out later that became the foundation for our success. So you have to hang around. That's the main principle. Hang around. So now we'll take a Gayatri break and be back here at 12 minutes after the hour. Gaur Premanande Haribol.